Welcome back to the Dr. Rob Show. My first guest is an attorney and the mother of a son with autism. Ariva Martin has made it her mission to help give a voice to her son Marty and the millions of other children with special needs by helping create the Special Needs Network and through her book, The Everyday Advocate. Ariva Martin joins me on the phone. Welcome, Ariva. I'm so glad to be speaking with you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, you know, this is something that is so needed by people. You know, the reason why my wife and I have this show is really because we feel that nobody is speaking to these parents about their rights. Nobody's speaking to these parents about what they can do. And I'm so happy that you're out there doing that and that you have this book. So why don't you talk a little bit about your own journey with your son, how you came to this point, and then if we can get some really great practical advice for parents out there that are struggling.
Great. So for me, Dr. Rob, I came to the work of autism and advocacy after my third child, Marty, was diagnosed at the age of 2. His diagnosis was devastating to me. Although my husband and I ran a pretty successful law firm in Los Angeles, I was very involved in my community. I was involved with nonprofit organizations, but I struggled. I struggled like many parents to find the best health care, to find educational solutions, and to really, figure out what it meant to provide excellent care for a child with autism. My son and I and our entire family were African Americans, and at the time there weren't a lot of African Americans talking about autism. They weren't, featured in the stories that ran in the media, and in some ways I just felt very, very isolated.
Yeah, well, that's a problem not just with, again, not just with African Americans, it's really in general. I mean, there wasn't anybody really talking about this, and especially in your community as well. Did anybody again, one of the things that I always like to point at, did anybody ever talk to you about what autism is, meaning what's happening in the brain or any of those things, not to mention, what to do about it?
Well, that's a good question. Our pediatrician, who was a developmental pediatrician that made the diagnosis, wonderful woman, but really had more questions than answers.
Right.
And I think that's what's so frustrating
right.
for parents is that often you're sitting in a doctor's office and the doctors are shaking their heads and they
right.
can't really give you a lot of information. One reason is because, as you know, autism is a spectrum disorder and it impacts kids very differently.
Right.
So just saying that someone has autism doesn't really tell you a great deal about them. In fact, it doesn't tell you anything.
No.
Because how one child's development, will progress can look very, very different and often does look very different than the next child.
Right.
So the doctor, couldn't tell us if our child would ever talk, wouldn't tell us, what his cognitive development would be. He just didn't have a lot of answers. And
right.
that's because, at that time, there weren't a lot of answers. So very frustrated by, again, as a lawyer, as someone who had run my own business, I was used to things being a lot more black and white. These shades of gray were very, very troubling for me. So I set out on a course to really get answers, to find out, what was behind the diagnosis and what I needed to do to get my son care. And it was through that journey that I, came to my book, The Everyday Advocate. I decided that I wasn't happy with the way information was being provided. You could Google autism and you could get, millions of hits, a lot of inconsistent information, a lot of contradictory information.
So, Ariva, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to get some time where, can you give people two things? One is, what are like 2 or 3 main tips that you can give real quickly to people? And then, how they can find out more. Obviously, they can read your book. But what are 2 good practical tips that you can really give to parents?
One is that autism is a disorder for which there are gold star interventions, and that those interventions can be provided by your local public school free of charge to you parents. So if you have a child that you suspect has autism, go to your local public school, ask for an assessment, ask for a meeting, what's called an IEP meeting, because the school has a legal obligation to provide free assessments and services for kids with autism.
Okay, well, that's great. And I'm sure that people, if they get your book, I'm sure they have a lot more information in there. They should all pick up your book. Do you have a website or anything?
I do. You can go to arivamartin.com. You can also go to specialneedsnetwork.org, a nonprofit I started. Lots of resources and information on the specialneedsnetwork.org webpage about assessments, interventions, services, programs around the country, and how parents can become effective advocates.
That's great. Well, Karen, Riva, thank you so much for being with us. What your work you're doing is fantastic. Please keep it up, and let's keep in touch, and let's get you back. Up next, we'll talk with Karen Hennessy, whose son Sean went through the Brain Balance program. Find out the progress he made after the break.